Welcome to Hope is Here. My name is Greg Horn, and we will continue our conversation with Dr. Melinda Moore. She's an assistant professor of psychology at Eastern Kentucky University and the clinical division director of the American Association of Suicidology. She is also a professional counselor, has a practice here in Central Kentucky, and we just had 2 powerful days talking about a topic that unfortunately is not pleasant to talk about, but man, we want to stop the suicide rate. It's at an alarming rate. Kentucky's been in the top 20 states with the highest percentage of people committing suicide for several years, so it hits here at home. So we've been talking about that the past couple of days. Children, Dr. Moore, unfortunately, lost her husband to that about 20 years ago. She has not only the academic credentials to talk about this topic, but also personally has been through it. She shared about how her faith really helped her get healing through this loss. So if you missed any of those programs, the first 2 we did, please go to our website, Hope is Here, and hopeishere.today. That's hopeishere.today, and listen to those 14-minute programs. I also want to let you know that Dr. Moore co-authored a book with Daniel Roberts called The Suicide Funeral or Memorial Service, honoring their memory and comforting their survivors. And when you and I met a few weeks ago over coffee just to kind of talk about this, with me being clergy, unfortunately, as I already knew, but you echoed it because you travel all across the country to speak. Unfortunately, clergy, a lot of times, they have not been adequately trained to deal with suicide either, have they?
Yeah, no. It's unfortunate, but clergy, but also clinicians, behavioral health providers, do not get training in their programs or get supervision in working with, suicidal people or suicide-bereaved people. And so as a result, they have no idea how to think about this. Of course, clergy are in a very powerful position, because oftentimes they're asked in the aftermath of a suicide death to do the funeral. And how they address the issue during the funeral is really critical. Oftentimes it conveys messages to the family, either good or bad, and it also can possibly demonstrate leadership to the community to look out for the people who are most impacted by this death. However, if the funeral service, and we've heard of several of them in the news lately, of priests and others who have kind of mangled these funeral services, it can really be very damaging to the family, and frankly, it can be very damaging to their walk of faith. A lot of people who have been harmed during these services oftentimes will say, I will never step back in that church again, and sometimes they don't go back to church at all.
I've seen that, unfortunately, and that's why we're talking about this. And so why would you talk about suicide? Well, over 1 million Americans attempt suicide each year, and then almost 10 million Americans struggle with suicidal thoughts each year. And so that's why we want to talk about this. We want to get this out in the open, and yet Dr. Moore, she shared the previous 2 programs, so we want to go a little more in depth today. Faith is a part of finding hope again, and unfortunately, pastors, their families are not immune. One of the largest churches in the country, Saddleback Community Church, their pastor and his wife, they lost their son to suicide.
Yeah, so Kay Warren is actually, she's a friend of mine. I serve with her on the National Action Alliance's Faith Community Task Force. She and I are going to be at a conference in April together and speaking on a panel together, and she and her husband, Rick Warren, lost their son, Matthew, nearly 6 years ago to suicide. And, she said, you can't live without hope. I knew that somehow, some way, I was going to have to rebuild hope. My son died by suicide. How could I rebuild hope in the face of losing him in this way? And, she really dug deep. She looked to faith to help rebuild that hope. But she also found in that a real dearth of understanding around suicide. So she's become somebody who's been a very important voice in the suicidology, suicide prevention realm, trying to bring faith leaders, clergy, into this umbrella of people who are in a powerful position to help individuals who are either struggling and suicidal in their congregations or their communities, or to help those family members who have lost a loved one to suicide.
Well, I'm so thankful that she's using that platform that God's given them with that wonderful church out in California. In fact, she helped co-author a book that might be a resource for people.
Yeah, so there was actually a beautiful video with Father Ron Rolheiser. Father Rolheiser has been for many years somebody who's written, he writes every year about the issue of suicide. It's a beautiful video called Reclaiming Life, Faith, Hope, and Suicide Loss. And then Father Ron Rolheiser has also written a book, and they've done some amazing things. And you can just Google both Ron Rolheiser and Kay Warren and get those materials.
Yeah, that's a video. I apologize. I called it a book. It's a Reclaiming Life. So I know people that sometimes are their resources, and there are out there, and you can Google Kay Warren and find that. One of the things I also like is that there's been some communities, some people coming together of faith. Talk about this thing that started here recently that's kind of pulling faith people together from different denominations and things, trying to bring hope to suicide.
Yeah, so there's this wonderful organization called the National Action Alliance, which is a public-private partnership, so people that represent the public sector and private sector, and there's a variety of task force, and the idea is it's called National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention, and there's one task force for faith communities. And as I said, I sit with Ms. Warren on this task force, and it's been actually a long time in the making, but there's been a growing recognition that faith communities are in a powerful position to lead the way. They can be wonderful gatekeepers, but they also can really do a great deal to help those individuals who are in crisis. And so the Faith, Hope, Life campaign, you can go to the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention's website. Also, there's another site, www.faith-hope.life.org, and learn more about the Faith, Hope, Life campaign. Join it. Get on our mailing list. And what we do is we provide a lot of resources, how to think about this from a faith perspective. But then also, if you want to introduce this to your church or your community, we also have resources on things you can put into your bulletin, suggested sermons. And then we also have the National Weekend of Prayer, which we've had for the last 2 Septembers, right around World Suicide Prevention Day, which is always September 10th. But the weekend before, we have acknowledged faith communities in this effort and asked faith communities and leaders to pray for individuals who are suicidal and then those who have been impacted by suicide loss. And it's called the National Weekend of Prayer, so you can learn more about the National Weekend of Prayer as well on that faithhopelife.org website.
Well, I love it. I really believe with all my heart, I believe I heard Rick Warren actually say, Pastor Rick Warren, that God never wastes a hurt. And I love that you've done that with losing your husband to suicide. And I think just the more that we can talk about this, people hurting, getting healing, man, we just want to bless and do people. If somebody's listening right now and they're just having a hard time dealing with this, maybe, forgiving themselves, just forgiveness. One of the things I've learned in 15 years of ministry, that people are harder on themselves than God would ever be. Have you found that to be true with people that deal with suicide? Oh, gosh, yes. Yeah.
We always look to ourselves for a cause for something bad happening. We never look to other circumstances. That's just kind of one of the truths of being a human, human existence. But also this issue of forgiveness. If we can forgive somebody, if we can forgive, because oftentimes people who lose a loved one to suicide, they get angry. And then they feel guilty for being angry, or they feel rejected. In my case, it was the worst possible kind of breakup I could imagine. It felt like a breakup. And so for a lot of spouses or partners, they oftentimes feel abandoned by their loved one who dies by suicide, or children of people who die, they feel abandoned. So if you can forgive your loved one for doing something that was definitely against their instinct, making perhaps what appeared like a rash decision in a moment of weakness when they were really struggling, really in a lot of pain, and didn't see any other way out. If you can forgive them, it's going to be so much easier for you to also forgive yourself. So I think forgiveness in all of this and healing, really looking for ways to heal, is important.
What are ways, if you've lost a loved one to suicide, you obviously, they're always going to have a special place in your heart. What are good, and I say healthy because it takes, a long time to even get to that point. I don't even know if there is that point, so I don't want to make that as a factual statement, but what are good ways to remember a loved one that's ended their life prematurely by suicide?
Yeah, across this country we have support groups. I think getting help for yourself is really important. Connecting with other people's like you. Like I said, for me, I kind of wandered in the desert for a really long time, and when I found people that were also suicide bereaved, those were the relationships where I really felt a lot of healing and hope and support. So I think finding people like yourself, but also really working through those issues. If you're mad at God, if you're mad at your loved one, getting a good therapist who understands this issue of suicide bereavement is really important. The American Association of Suicidology, their website, suicidology.org, has a list of these loss support groups across the country, so you can search on there. But I think also reaching out, we at EKU have a website for suicide prevention. It's www.suicideprevention.eku.edu, and we have resources in Central Kentucky. But we can, if you send us an email, we can also perhaps find you a therapist or somebody in your community that might be, kind of a good person to talk to in the aftermath of this loss.
Well, I know you've informed me of one that goes on in Eastern support groups, and I know there's others here in Central Kentucky, so there is help available.
There's lots of help available. Church of the Good Shepherd in Lexington has a weekly support group every Monday night, and then I have one at Eastern Kentucky University every other Tuesday night that meets at the Madison County Library. So there is support. There are people who are knowledgeable and supportive of what you're going through right here in Central Kentucky.
Well, one of the things I know that you had shared with when we met about a month ago, you shared about how after you lost your husband to suicide that, you kind of felt social isolation. And so this is a great way to try to, come out of that, because it's easy just to kind of, stay inside and kind of become a recluse, isn't it? And keep that pain inside. So this is a great part of the healing process, isn't it?
Very much so. And, and it changes your life. Suicide changes your life. You cannot ignore that. As somebody once said, your address book changes. The people who are once your friends, people who were close to you, sometimes they just fall off the face of the earth. But people come into your life who you would never think would be your friend or would reach out to you. And then I think through finding support, finding help, reaching out to, faith communities, you then find other people that you really connect with at a very deep level. And I think that's why suicide survivor support groups are so meaningful and so powerful, because we get each other at a deep level. We have walked this incredibly painful journey alone, and then we can walk it with other people occasionally. And there is something about that is so healing and just really powerful.
Well, recently, and we only have about a minute and a half left, but a pastor that was from here out in California, Jim Howard, unfortunately ended his life. And, people in the faith community, they're not immune to suicide, are they?
No, it's unfortunate. We've had several high-profile clergy die by suicide over the past 6 months. Andrew Steckline was another one out in California, and then, of course, Jim Howard. But the thing is that the pastors in Lexington have killed themselves. I know a priest friend of mine told me that he knew of 3 priests who had killed themselves. So clergy are not immune. In fact, I think being clergy is a very isolating profession, and oftentimes you don't have anybody to talk to. So, you are not immune to this phenomenon of suicide.
Well, that's why we're doing this program today, is we do want to create awareness. If somebody wants to get a copy of your book, The Suicide Funeral or Memorial Service, which is honoring the memory of comforting survivors by you and Rabbi Daniel A. Roberts, what's the best way to get a copy of your book?
Really just go into Amazon. Just type in The Suicide Funeral and it'll pop right up. One of the things that we're finding is this book was actually written for clergy and seminarians, but what we're finding is that it's helping a lot of bereaved of faith navigate this journey, because it contains homilies and template homilies and sermons for clergy and seminarians who might be trying to understand how do you do this for somebody who's died by suicide. But then it also contains perspectives from a broad range of faith perspectives on how do you understand suicide. And so I think this can help a lot of different kinds of people, but especially suicide bereaved.
Well, I've read about 50 pages of it, and it's a great read if you've lost somebody. And what I mean by a great read, just to help process things, because there's not a lot of resources to do that, unfortunately. And this is recently written, so I want to encourage you to pick up a book, a copy of this, The Suicide Funeral or Memorial Service, honoring your loved one's memory, comforting their survivor, edited by Dr. Melinda Moore, our guest, and Daniel A. Roberts. Dr. Moore, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, I'm Greg Horn. It's Hope is Here. If you tune in late or you want to say, hey, I want to catch those other 2 programs, I want to learn about this, I've been affected by suicide, go to our website, hopeishere.today. Hopeishere.today.
CMI is your full-service human resources provider in Central Kentucky. For 15 years, CMI Human Resources has taken great pride in helping organizations and people work. Whether it's employee handbooks or help in filling a position, no job is too large or too small for CMI. Contact the professionals today at CMI Human Resources, 859-296-2800, or online at cmiconsulting.com.